My name is Oliver Pickard and I play with classic cars on some of the world's most beautiful roads for a living. That Porsche rear engine blood shining through. In 2020 I went to Retromobile Paris and saw some of the most exquisite, handmade, hand-finished and expensive cars on the planet. On returning home, the pandemic hit and I decided that the time for dreaming was done. I wanted to build my dream. I wanted to build the car that I had been designing since childhood. So with the help of my aerospace engineer and rallyist father, Andrew, we set about trying to find the perfect project. We found it rotting in a side yard in Normandy. Crashed, twisted, broken, buckled and fire damaged, a GTM. We dragged it home and tore it apart. Re-engineered from the ground up. Engine, suspension, fuel system, drivetrain, even the seating position. Everything. Bespoke, one of one. This is Project Mosquito. Good morning!
Good morning!
Welcome to the workshop. In last week's video, we got the top chassis rails in.
And this week we're going to do the bottom chassis rails.
So then we'll have the beginnings of the front of a car. And we've roughed in all of our geometry.
Yep.
So that we can get our widths right and all that, because obviously you have to make sure that you don't have a tube where a steering rack needs to be.
Yep. Or a wishbone.
Or a wishbone, or a pivot, or a bracket, or whatever. Especially since the packaging in this thing is so tight, because it's tiny. But hopefully by the end of this video, no, I shouldn't say hopefully, because that's non-committal, isn't it? By the end of this video, we will have the beginnings of the chassis proper.
Okay, so what I've done, I've made these little brackets, and basically this will get tacked into place there. The bottom tube will be tacked in there, and then when we get everything all well, we can tack it all together, and then when we finish weld it, we can actually remove this because it won't be necessary. But that's just here, just to keep everything in place, because we don't have a big chassis table we can bolt everything to, which is very, very necessary really. But because it's a one-off, we'd spend more time making the jigs and the chassis than we will building the car.
Yeah, you'd never get a video finished.
No.
That's one of the reasons why, if you're wondering at home, why car companies don't completely seam weld car chassis. Your average production car is just kind of spot welded and then the rest is seam sealer. And the reason for that is the more you weld something, the more heat you introduce into it. And so when you introduce heat into sheets and tubes, everything wants to twist.
And distort. Yeah.
And distort. So they spot weld things so that they're not introducing too much heat and so that things stay relatively square. That keeps production times low and means they can make more cars. And we have to kind of fight against that and weld it in bits and make little things like that to try and help stop things twisting. And then that way your chassis is the same, or your roll cage is the same shape when you finish welding it as when you start it.
Yep.
Well, we can use two little ones if you want.
Two little ones.
Two little ones it is. Shim shibbity, shim shibbity, shim shim shim. There we go. I say, Father, have you made a little jig?
I have.
He's done a little jig.
The sacrificial jig.
There we go, 4 chassis legs. But I know what you're thinking. Is that bottom wishbone below the chassis leg? And the answer is yes.
It is.
Yes, it is.
And the reason for this is we needed to keep this section here as wide as possible for pedal boxes.
So I don't have to wear ballet slippers every time I drive.
Bigger fuel tank. Basically,
room for activities.
Makes more room inside the car, which is always a good thing in such a tiny little car.
Yeah, but also the steering rack sits in front of this lower wishbone on an MX-5, and so we need plenty of room for our steering rack for both moving fore and aft, so that we can get
up and down.
Yep.
No,
so we
don't get any bump steer or roll steer.
So we can get located exactly where we need to be. Now, luckily, our steering rack should be almost exactly where an MX-5 rack goes, and the reason for that is we have an MX-5 roughly approximate shaped wheels, and we're shaped wheels, you know what I mean, offset wise as well as diameter wise. We aren't lowering our MX-5 suspension, we are actually having MX-5 suspension function as MX-5 suspension is designed to function, because they did all this work and spent all these multi-millions to get it to handle like a lot of Sedan, so we're just going to use it. And so because we're not messing with any of that other than slightly different geometry because our engine's in the back and because we're 300 and something kilos lighter, then there's no point messing with it, is there?
No.
The only other thing is that mid-engine cars have rake. A lot of people don't talk about this, but basically the back of a mid-engine car always sits higher than the front for various reasons to do with like weight transfer and corner weighting and rotation and all sorts. Now we know we have naturally an MX-5 has a very good roll center compared to our rear suspension, and that's because our rear suspension is from a four-wheel drive car, so you're always going to have beneficial suspension. Also our uprights are actually shorter, so that makes for massively beneficial roll centers no matter what you do.
And our rear suspension pickup points are higher, actually physically higher in the car than these are, so the front
suspension gram film.
The front suspension points are lower than the rear. So the car is naturally raked.
Anyway, so we won't have to set like ride heights different or anything. It is already in the chassis.
And the only thing different we're going to do, we're going to make what the normal MX-5 is the top suspension mount. The two brackets that go here, thusly go here and here. Right, we're going to make them adjustable, so we can move this top point forward and then or backwards to adjust the caster.
Yeah.
Because we don't know how much caster we need, because there's an engine sat over the top of the car like there was on an MX-5.
Well, let's explain what caster is first. Right, caster is it's usually described like a caster wheel, you know, like on a shopping trolley, how the pivot is here but the wheel is there, so that the wheel rotates around the pivot. That's a bit of a rubbish explanation, isn't it? But basically, caster is an angle that runs through the wheel. So if you can imagine both of your pivot points on your wheel, so your top and bottom pivot, ball joints, thank you, but they are a pivot, lining up, and so they run straight vertically down. Your car would be super twitchy and your steering would have no self-centering. So you're driving towards the corner, you turn in and a bit like, whoa, and then all of a sudden on the way out of the corner, the car wouldn't want to pull itself straight.
You'd have to physically turn the car back straight again.
So you know that really annoying thing that automotive journalists do when they're on camera and they talk into the camera and they let go of the steering wheel? They'd instantly go into a hedge, because roads have undulations. Roads aren't smooth, roads aren't flat, and roads aren't level. No, not even German roads. So your car would wander all over the road because it wouldn't want to pull straight and it wouldn't want to drive in a straight line. So to make it pull straight and to make it drive in a straight line, we give it caster. Now caster is an angle given that way, and then you increase the angle more and more and more. The good thing about caster is that it gives you plenty of steering feel, and it allows the car to drive in a straight line. The bad thing about caster, it gives very hard steering, doesn't it?
If you go too far with your caster, it makes it very difficult to drive, and it wears everything out, your steering rack and everything, because everything's physically more difficult.
Yeah. Also, it can create a twisting force on the wheel. If your kingpin inclination angle isn't correct, and I know this is a lot of information all at once, but those two same ball joints, as well as being inclined that way, they're also inclined that way. And the idea is that the two joints line up. If you drew an imaginary line through them kind of this way, they're supposed to line up perfectly with your contact patch in a perfect world, and I always do, because I spent lots of time figuring it all out. Now, if you don't have those 2 points lining up directly with the center point of your contact patch, that's called scrub. So that's the distance from your contact patch to that imaginary line. And if you have scrub with caster, it creates what's called a moment arm. So that distance amplifies when the wheel turns, and it basically lifts the wheel by that amount. So when you turn your suspension, so when you turn your steering, one wheel actually lifts itself up and reduces its own grip, which is...
Yeah, and the size of the contact patch.
Yeah, and the size of the contact patch.
And
so
it wears your tyres out.
Yeah, and messes with your weight transfer. Yeah. Dad's point, we're going to make this top arm adjustable so that we can adjust that caster angle, because I forgot everything that we're talking about, so that we can adjust that caster angle because we don't know how much caster we want. Cars with the steering arm at the front tend to run a lot of caster. So a lot of Mercedes have the steering arm at the front and they run tons of caster. Like a 2CV, like you see them turn around the corner and the wheels like lead over, which is not optimal for what we want. But like a Honda NSX, a Honda NSX, early ones run like 8 degrees of caster, which is a lot. And the last ones, like the NSX Type R, run like 9.5 degrees. MX-5 guys, an MX-5 I think is 3 degrees from the factory, but everybody, people like Flying Miata and all of those guys, they're setting all the spec Miata guys, they're just to 5 degrees, and some even try and modify their stuff to get to 8 degrees. So we simply don't know how many degrees of caster we want to run. So we're going to make it adjustable, basically. But if you compare that to like a Lotus Elise or something like that, they run 3.8 degrees, which is...
their steering rack is actually behind the front axle.
Yeah, so their angle is half as much as something like an NSX or an MX-5. So we don't know how much we're going to run, so what we're going to do is make it adjustable, and then we can adjust it.
Adjust it.
So what we're going to do, Dad?
We're going to make the bottom wishbone mount brackets. That way we've got a fixed datum to work from, and then we can set all the other suspension geometry from a fixed position rather than it all being floating in the air, which is never a good thing. And
they're relatively the simplest bit.
They're the simplest ones to do. So that gives our datum, which everything else can then come off.
Yeah, if you don't know, a datum point is a point from which you measure. So whenever you're making a car, what you do is you draw a datum line. I actually drew one down the body on the other side of the body, over there. And when we were designing the car, we drew everything in our plans from that point. So yeah, that'll be our point from which we measure everything else from.
Yeah, on both sides.
Yeah, because because that's one big long bolt that we can put through, we can measure from that up to where we're going. So the one slight complication of our lower mount for our bottom wishbones is they have these eccentrics on them, which is the MX-5 way of adjusting alignment, and a lot of modern cars have these, whether it's McPherson strut or whether it's double wishbone suspension. Your car probably has them on if it was made in the last 30 years or so, and they're pretty good. So we're going to incorporate them into our bottom wishbones. The one issue is that means they have to have little slots in them rather than having just a hole. If you haven't noticed yet, these are our MX-5 Miata Lotus seat adapter brackets that were way too heavy to actually hold the seat, but make a really lovely suspension mount when you cut most of them away. Just to give a little perspective as to how much more work double wishbone suspension is than a McPherson strut setup, you have 4 wishbones at the front. So each of those 4 wishbones has 4 little tabs that hold it onto the chassis. So that's 16, and then you've got 2 shock mounts, or 2 shock towers, and so that's 18. So that's 18 mounts just to hold on your front suspension. That's before you get to wishbones or anything like that. And that's why a lot of like manufacturers don't bother with double wishbone suspension, even though it's better, because it's much easier to do a McPherson strut setup where you've only got 1 wishbone for each wheel. So that's, you know, 4 tabs or even 2 tabs if you engineer it that way. And then you've got a big shock tower setup at the top, but you've already got an inner arch. So to make an inner arch into a shock tower isn't that much more work. You're already making an inner arch, so you might as well make it an inner arch shock tower. So that saves them a bunch of money because that can all be stamped out as one. And that's why we celebrate cars like the MX-5 and like the new Alpine A110 for having double wishbone setups, because it's not only is it so much better for your car and so much better handling, but it's also a huge labour of love and a huge expense in development, engineering and production. We've reached a really good place to stop, haven't we?
Yep.
Because making 8 of those little guys,
There's a considerable labour of love.
it is. It's one of those things, if you had a laser cutter, you could kind of set it going, go away, do something else, and it would do on its own.
But we don't.
But we don't have one.
So we're it. We
yeah.
are the laser cutter.
We are the laser cutter, we are the factory, and it will be adjustable. But that's the thing, they all have to be exactly the same as each other. Otherwise, you'd never align it. Now, in my usual patented Pickard path of most resistance, I've designed that back bottom suspension mount to be mounted on a compound curve.
Yep.
And the only problem is it has to be laser straight. And mounting a laser straight thing on a compound curve takes a considerable amount of measuring and fettling, doesn't it?
Yep.
And so, to be honest, it's really, really hot and we can't be bothered doing it today. So that's why we're finishing off now, because it's one of those things that takes 3 seconds on camera, but can take all day to do.
Well, all afternoon.
Well, if we do both, it can take a day to get it absolutely bang on straight. And it's one of those things that, because it's an alignment thing and because it's a suspension geometry thing, it has to be perfect. And so what we do is we usually measure it all, get it all perfect. I have a slight panic attack, and then we measure it all again to make sure, because it's one of those, like I say, it's one of those things, it has to be perfect. And
it will be.
It will be. But I'm really, really proud of where we've gotten up to now.
Yep.
Because
we've got the new bottom tubing and the bottom suspension mounts.
yeah, and unlike the rear, because we actually have somewhere to measure from now, we can make both sides at the same time because it's a mirror image of each other. But I'm really, really, really happy, really proud of how it's coming on.
Yep.
And it's one of those things that all of a sudden it's going to look like a suspension. But I can't wait to take it off this chassis table with 4 wheels on it.
No. Oh, they're gonna.
Oh, I've got to polish 2 more wheels. Oh, that's just dawned on me.
At least you got your new polish.
Yeah. If anybody ever hears me say the words mirror polish sandcast wheels, tell me not to do it because it's dumb. But well happy. Yeah.
Yep.
And my new polish looks really good as well. Right. If you compare that wheel to that back wheel, it looks really, really good.
Might not pick it up on camera.
No, you might not be able to see it, but it's a lot less milky. One of the problems with polishing aluminium is it can look quite milky because of micro scratches in it and stuff, and it is a lot less milky. Now, one of the things I wanted to just touch on before the end of the video is there's been a lot of talk in the comments and on the social medias about the Japanese inspiration of this car. And this car being like very Japanese.
No.
Now, despite having a lot of Japanese cars, you're not a big Japanese car guy, are you?
No.
And we did like this car is kind of my vision, but we've very much designed this together, especially mechanically, haven't we?
Yeah.
The parts that we've gone for are the best parts for the job.
Yeah.
We aren't like brand loyalty. You very much like Renaults, but that's because you've spent a lot of time working on old Renaults. But we're not brand loyalty kind of people. Like the best parts are the best parts for the job. And I love the K-Series engine.
Yep.
It's a wicked engine.
Superb engine.
Yeah. It's
a modern BDA, modern day BDA.
a BDA, if you're not aware, it's a, what does BDA stand for? Belt driven something. Yeah. So it's a Ford Rally engine that they put in Escorts in the late 70s.
Yep.
Mid 70s, late 70s. But yeah, it's a wicked engine. The inspiration from this car comes from cars from the 60s really, the late 60s, early 70s, and things like the Targa Florio, the Tour de France, which used to be a motor race as well as a bicycle race. It comes from like Mille Miglia, a lot of the road rallying that used to happen around Europe. It's kind of the golden age.
Road racing car.
Yes.
Like something you'd use on the Carrera Panamerica.
Yes. Because a lot of what would happen is companies would make this like wicked racing car for Le Mans, Carrera Panamerica, Mille Miglia, and then some incredibly rich like nutter would come along and go, yes, I'll give you all of the money if you produce a road car version for me. And they'd be like, but it's not really a road car, sir. And they'd be like, I don't care, I want one. And so they made, I think it's 5. Might be GT40 road cars. They're all painted really weird colours, and they've all got a really nice leather interior. They did it for Porsche, did it as well. Yeah. There's like there's a road going 914 that belonged to Count Rossi, and it's like this gorgeous silver 914, no livery, and it's got a brown leather interior and sills that are that wide, clad in like a cow. And I really like the absurdity of those cars. And I really like stuff like Stratoses and Alpines and stuff like that. And so that's the inspiration. But it just so happens that that's what a lot of the retro JDM like Japanese guys are fans of as well. And that's why you can't have an old Skyline or an S30 240Z without having a Nardi steering wheel from Italy, Solex carbs from France, and Marshall headlights from France, because they were inspired by the same stuff that we're inspired by. Yeah. And that's why they love minis so much. I mean, we grew up near I grew up near a massive mini retailer for like parts and modified bits and stuff. And they used to send crates and crates and crates of stuff to Japan. They used to sell more to Japan than they did in the UK, didn't they? Yeah. And like Lotuses and Alpines, there's more Lotus Europas in Japan than there is here. Like we never see them, and yet in Japan they're common. And it just so happens that we're inspired by the same stuff. And because I don't have multi millions to buy a Count-Rossi escaped racing car, we're building this. But that's what it will very much be like. It will be, you know, it's one of those things you know when you sit around after a beer and you're like, I know they never raced the Miura, but what if they had? It's one of those.
Yeah.
But we're, well, skilled enough and stupid enough to actually go, let's build it. But yeah, that's the idea. But it will end up with a lot of parts that are kind of the classic retro Japanese thing.
Yeah.
And
the thing that the Japanese picked it up in Europe, took it to Japan, fitted it to all the cars, and basically we're going to do the same.
Yeah, and then Americans look at classic Japanese cars and they're like, those are cool headlights. Yeah. Nardy wheels are a classic Japanese thing, and in a way they are. They're an inherited piece of culture because there are more nardy wheels in Japan than there've ever been in Italy. And silly things like my steering rack. This steering rack is a mini steering rack, and it's made by Cam Gears Limited. Now, Cam Gears Limited made a fancy steering rack for minis that is 2.2 turns lock to lock, which if you're not familiar with steering racks and ratios, because most people aren't, that's very fast. That's a very fast ratio. So that's 1.5 turns either way from centre. It will be wick.
Oh, less than that.
It's 1.1, isn't it? Yeah. So what's so clever about that? Well, Cam Gears Limited made steering racks for classic Ferraris. So that's if you're familiar with classic Ferraris, that's why Ferraris have a UNF steering rack thread, because they are made by the same company that made this very fast racing mini rack. And that's why I want to use one of these rather than an MX-5 rack, because an MX-5 rack is a lot heavier than this, and also it's a lot slower, and it will be dead on centre and all that, whereas this thing will be lively. So we will have a lot of stuff that is in like very Japanese in a lot of ways, and very classic, but it's
old European.
But it's old European. It's just a shared piece of automotive culture, which I kind of like. You know, we are British and we live in France, and we are very international. You know, my partner's African, and so to have as much of that influence as possible, I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
What makes me laugh is when a lot of people go, "Oh, I like your SSR wheels," or "I like the work wheels, work equip or 2s or whatever they are," and I'm like, "No, they're French Gottis." But it just so happens that they like the same stuff.
Yeah.
It's like Compomotive wheels in the UK are very similar to SSR wheels and all the 3-piece wheels that were produced in Japan. But it's cool, I like it. And I like the fact that it's so international. You know, we used MX-5 stuff because it fit with the rear suspension. Not any other reason other than that. Originally, one of my designs for this car, if it used a mini engine, would have been to use Simca front suspension, because that is exactly the same layout with the steering rack in front, and everything is a Simca Rally. But it just so happens that these hubs are 4x100 and the rear hubs are 4x100 would all work together. And it just so happens to work out that mini hubs are the exact same bolt pattern as Simca hubs, or very close to it, so you can match them up. Right. But yeah, I'm super happy with where we're getting to. It looks like a car. And I say that every single episode.
That's in the first episode.
Yeah, that's going to have to be a t-shirt one day. It looks like a car and it's just a pile of pieces on the floor. But yeah, I love it. It's exciting. I come in here every single week and it's like Christmas. And a lot of people said to me when I started this, not necessarily like internet friends and stuff, but a lot of just like people in my life said to me, you get halfway through it and you'll get bored. And you know, it'll like project fatigue will set in. And we did take a little bit of a break, didn't we, last summer to work on our other cars. But I still look at this every single time I walk in this barn. In fact, Dad will tell you, I actually leave the barn doors open when I'm not working on the car, so I can sit in the garden and stare at the car. And Dad always says, "Why are you staring at it? It's not gonna get it done." But it's because I love it. And it's because it's something that I've been designing, I've been dreaming of since I was that tall. And
Or a while ago.
yeah, it was. It was a very long time ago, but you know it's true.
Yep.
And people have been asking about the arches as well. Might as well do a little bit of question answering, right? We aren't going to stick arches on it. We're not going to put bubble arches on it. People are like, are you going to put bubble arches? Are you going to stick arches on it? Are you going to put mini arches on it? Are you going to put mini Miglia arches on it?
Nope.
No. We are going to wide arch the car. So this car will get custom coachwork on the arches to make it right.
From scratch.
From scratch.
In fact, we bought a body.
And we're going to not use most of it.
We're going to use very little of it.
Yes. Because there's a lot of little bits on the GTM that I don't like. Things like these door surrounds with the little lip on them to stop rain coming in because they didn't have good door seals. I want to get rid of those because I don't like them. Things like this flat here, which makes it look like it was dropped on its head as a child. I hate it, and it's going. The back of the roof here needs to be pulled down because I don't like the fact that it's a bit of a balloon. And again, that comes from it being popped out of a mould, and probably it comes with the fact that it has a sunroof chopped into it. That may have made the roof go boop as it was chopped out. But yeah, there's loads of little things. And the wheel arches, there's a GTM bodyline here. And this GTM bodyline comes from the very first GTMs. It was never changed, and it's a nice little curve. And it flows right into the doors and then right into the front end where you have the front arches. And then at some point, someone put arches on an arch. It's got two wheel arches, and the front has two wheel arches again. It has a wheel arch, and then it has a house martin, and then it has another wheel arch on the end of it. And what I don't like is a wheel arch and a wheel arch. Just have one wheel arch. So what we're going to do is we're going to widen it from this point out. And so when you see it on the road, it will look like it has always been that way. It won't look modified. It will look just correct and like it's always existed. And that's part of the reason why I wanted a 14-inch wheel, because not only does the larger rotation of a 14-inch wheel help this car to be more stable with a short wheelbase, because big wheels rotate slower than small wheels, so it gives us more stability, but also often GTMs can look a bit lost at the back. The back wheel can look a bit anemic, and then when you see, or undernourished as my dad likes to say, but then when you see one that has like big chunky tyres on the back, it just looks right. So that's why I wanted a bigger wheel. And so we are going to have to chop a lot of this out, and we're going to have to replace pretty much all of this. And of course, the boot as well is something that we're going to chop out completely and remake. So yeah, this original body that's made of two bodies, that's actually made of three bodies because the front end's from a different car completely, will be remade again, and it will be reborn again, and some of it will be reused again. But it's still what it is, and it's still in the spirit. It just will be made to look the best. You know, one of the guys on the GTM Facebook group once said, "It looks like Oliver's making the best GTM ever made," and that made my heart swell when I read that, because even though there's no Mini left apart from headlights, windows, it's the only windows, but a GTM uses classic Mini windows, headlights, windows, steering rack, and some other odds and ends. There's not a heck of a lot of Mini left, but it's still in the spirit. It's still got a wheel in each corner, and it's still got proper suspension, and I absolutely love it. And it's got twice as much suspension travel as a classic GTM does. It has, you know, it's the same weight, twice the suspension travel, twice as much grip, proper damping. It's got twice as much power. It's a racing, like British touring cars Mini. It's awesome. 100% more power. What more could you want? And it will weigh the same. I'm overjoyed with it. And all of your comments during the week, every single week, that just shows I read every single one of them, and it's really important to me, are your comments, because they keep us motivated. And we often sit down of an evening, Dad and I'm reading all of your comments, because you take the time out of your day to write them, so I take the time out of my day to read them all and respond to as many as I can. it's really important to me, this thing of kind of you all watching, and this is something that I've said this in a previous video, but this is not a YouTube project car. This was never designed to be a YouTube project car. This was a car that I wanted to build with my dad, and I've wanted to build it with my dad for forever. And so I'm building it with my dad, and I just so happen to have this amazing avenue to share it with all of you. And so you liking these videos and subscribing to the channel and leaving comments and clicking the bell icon and all of that is a huge deal to me, and it really shows that your support for this car and your support for what we are doing, because we're doing it the long way around. You know, the only parts on this car other than factory OEM parts are parts that we have made. You know, the only bolt-on parts are parts that we have made and then bolt on, and that's kind of awesome, but it's not how other people do it. And so your enthusiasm and stuff on social media and all of that, in all of my social media is in the description below, but all of your enthusiasm it really does make my day. And so thank you all for your enthusiasm in this project. Thank you all for your support, because it really does mean a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to my dad as well, even though he's run off. So thank you all for watching. Please be awesome to each other. If you'd like to subscribe at the end of the beauty shots, because I know you all like the beauty shots, there will be 2 buttons, one to subscribe to this channel and one for my other channel I have with my partner, because I'm also building a house at the same time as building a car, because I'm an idiot. And we have a beautiful barn, and we have a beautiful garden, and my partner makes videos where she does gardening stuff and makes sauerkraut and cooks and does stuff like that, and I do house stuff and barn stuff, so make sure you check that channel out as well. And of course there'll be the full playlist to these videos and another video which I haven't decided yet. So thank you all for watching. Please be awesome to each other, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye. So he had a haircut.
Have a haircut.
You had a haircut.
Have a haircut.
He's had a haircut. Right. Ready?